Welcome, everyone. I'm going to get started. We still have one speaker who's just about to get on. But while that's happening, I will start us off with introductions. Um, First of all, welcome to everyone. My name is Philippa Rosopoulos, and tonight I will be facilitating this conversation on community schools and collaborative governance. This webinar is partly an offshoot of a report that Partners for Dignity and Rights recently released on community schools. Please check it out when you have a chance. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm zooming in from Lenape Land, AKA Brooklyn. I'm a fellow at Partners for Dignity and Rights, which was founded 20 years ago using a human rights framework to fight for equity, justice, and strong public goods. A lot of my work is on collaborative governance or co-governance, which is when government and community work together to develop and implement policy together. I'm also a mother of 2 kids with IEPs in New York City, so I know what it's like as a parent struggling with a public school system that can be complicated, confusing, and deeply inequitable. But when it works and your kid is at the right school and getting the right services with the right teachers, it is just the best feeling in the world. We have 3 wonderful speakers tonight. All 3 have been working for years on community schools in one capacity or another. Before I introduce our speakers, I want to thank the folks at the NEA for co-hosting this event and for all their support along the way. Our first speaker, who is we're still having some technical difficulties, but she will be on here soon, is Carla Griego. She she's in a district meeting, but will be with us shortly. She represents LAUSD Board District 5. Before that, she was a special education teacher for 20 years, including serving as the community school coordinator at McAllister High School, a school for parenting teens. Our next speaker is Rosa Jimenez. She is Carla's chief of staff. Before that, she spent 18 years teaching and serving as an instructional coach in Los Angeles, during which time she was an active member of United Teachers Los Angeles. She was also a founding member of Students Deserve and Reclaim Our Schools Los Angeles, and subsequently served as a steering committee of the LA Community Schools Initiative. Rosa is also a mom of an LAUSD student. Welcome. And our third speaker, Dr. Kira Green, Executive Director of the Center for Policy Initiatives in San Diego. CPI has been an integral part of the San Diego Community Schools Initiative, both in getting it started and then in its implementation. Before joining CPI, Dr. Green was an assistant professor of sociology at San Diego State University. Welcome all, and welcome to our audience. I'm really going to try to speak as little as possible, but before we get going, I wanted to briefly touch on community schools, what they are and how they work, so that everyone who's watching understands exactly what we're talking about. And I want to start by saying we all want to build great schools, but building great schools is a wicked problem. Wicked problems are characterized by their intricate nature, involving numerous factors and interconnected systems, making them difficult to isolate and address with no clear solution or end date. Which also means it's never going to be one cool trick to fix schools. Not testing, not privatization through charter schools and voucher programs, and not AI. AI cannot replace teachers, and I cannot believe I have to say that, but here we are. There are community schools models all across the country, and each is a little different from the other, often depending on how the initiative got started or what the needs and priorities of the community are. Despite these differences, the model is based on 6 key practices that work together to form a multifaceted approach. If you have a wicked problem, you need a wicked solution, and that's community schools. I won't go through all 6 key practices, but I will say that they begin with integrated student supports, continue on to expanded learning time and opportunities. They also, number 3 is family and community engagement. And the last, but to me, most important, is collaborative leadership and practice. The last one is why we are so particularly excited about the initiatives in LA and San Diego. They have centered collaborative decision-making between all the major stakeholders in their models, and it's one reason their initiatives have been thriving. Okay, now I'll stop talking, except to ask for my first question to Rosa. Rosa, can you tell us a little bit about your history and how you got involved in community schools? And can you tell us about how community schools came to be in LA? It's actually a pretty amazing story.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, and the board member's trying to get on, but she'll be on any minute now. But yeah, was said, I was on the district side as a teacher for 18 years, and I actually started teaching in 2007, and right at the foot of the Great Recession, right? And so I was one of those young teachers, a recent mom, just recent mom who was given a pink slip two years in a row. And a lot of us during that time really felt like not only was our union not really supporting us, right, but we were also facing what was the high intensity of privatization, right, in Los Angeles, I think, as was happening in other places as well. And so I think that was kind of my intro into teaching and intro into organizing and activism in Los Angeles. And I got involved in what at the time was the Coalition for Educational Justice, and included a lot of teachers who were part of the Progressive Educators Caucus in Los Angeles. And from that came what eventually became the movement for the schools LA students deserve, modeled after what was happening in Chicago as well, and the Progressive Caucus in our union. And really that was kind of a catalyst in the space for really visioning the kind of schools that we want in Los Angeles, what kind of union that we want, the kind of schools that we want, and creating this vision for schools that involved not just things inside the classroom, but outside of the classroom. And one of those pieces would become community schools, right? Like, how do we fight for and build community schools? And what are models, what are places that exist out there? Hey, Carla. That we could model ourselves after. I was also, at the time, I became a teacher at the UCLA Community School, which is a school that is part of that was in a partnership school of the UCLA. And so that was a place where I think I also learned a lot about what the potentials of community schools are, what the power of collaboration of teacher-led schools was, and really brought many of those ideas into what eventually would become the Community Schools Initiative in Los Angeles. And all of that came with a big fight. As you know, we went on strike for the first time in 2019, and one of the big things that we won in that strike was funding for community schools. And then after that, we still had to keep fighting, right, to ensure that we had funding, to ensure that we had infrastructure for community schools, to ensure that there was accountability, right, to ensure that the our district was working with us and not against us on this, knowing that that was what was going to be um, successful. And yeah, we continue to do that. We have 70 schools now in LA and 70 community schools that are part of the initiative. And we're still to this day fighting to make sure that they're funded and fighting to make sure that they have the infrastructure they need, and the supports they need to be successful.
Thank you, Rosa. First of all, welcome to Carla as well. Thank you. We just got going. And I know you know the story. So I just want to say that in the chat, there's a link to Building the Power to Reclaim Our Schools, which is just an extraordinary report about the strike and that win, that extraordinary win. How do you build power? How do you build community to build power? Because I know part of that fight was also connecting with the community, teachers and community coming together, realizing that their fights were each other's. And that's how you win, right? Thank you, Rosa. I want to hear more, but let's move on to Carla. Thank you so much for being here. My first question for you is, you also have worn many hats. Can you describe your work with community schools? And can you tell us about how the LA Community Schools Initiative is going Now, what is working? What are the challenges? We are 5 years in. You have 70 schools, which is, my memory is that was what the MOU is for. So what's the status? What's the road ahead? And what's going on?
Hi, thank you for having me here. So yeah, I was a community school coordinator for 2 years. And prior to that, I also was what here in LA, in UTLA, we call area chair. So I was a chair of a big region, north area of UTLA. And I, I was North Area Chair when we went on strike in 2019. And I also worked with Reclaim Our Schools LA, which, as you know, was fighting for community schools. So I had that background. And along with other board members, we really pushed our union to make this part of the contract campaign, our bargaining for common good. And so I knew about that. So when I came to work at an option school for pregnant and parenting minors, I realized that we needed a lot of supports and that our school, because it served such a unique population and also drew from the community, that it would be a good place to, it would be a good place to have a community school. So we applied for to be a community school. We did all the work prior to becoming a community school in terms of engaging parents, engaging students so they could have a voice and be participants in making decisions about our school, our vision, our mission. And so doing all of that work really put us in a good place to become a community school. And our principal was certainly on board with that, which is very essential that you have the administration and the educators on board and parents and students to get you started with a community school, so that at least it's not a big surprise for anybody that you're going to be sharing power, right? That's a big part of being a community school, is that you're sharing power. So my principal was on board and the community was on board, so we became a community school. And I did that for 2 years, and it was great because I learned a lot. I learned um just deeply how to not just engage parents, but work toward empowering parents. So that was one thing. And how to get people involved in the decision-making process so that you can, and also centering the highest need population in at your school. And the way that you do it is by looking at, all the data that you collect. And then you realize, oh, these are the people that are not represented, right? Their voice is not here. Their concerns are not evident in our data. So we need to work with them. This is our focus and our goal. And in our case, it was foster youth, right? We were seeing that they were the ones who were not, because they didn't have parents who advocated for them. Their needs were not at the top of our priority list. So we wanted to center on that and be very intentional in building relationships with their social workers, because we figured that was the connection that we had, and or with the group home that they lived in. So that was my work around community schools, and of course building the partnerships outside. But to me, what is very essential to a community school is that shared leadership and that transparency, that democratic process. And so I worked really hard to make that happen, because we don't have too many models like that in LAUSD. So I wanted to bring this vision to reality, to show that it could work. And the other thing is, in community schools, we also speak to racial justice, right? That's part of the mission, is that the work that you do is through that lens of racial justice. And so it that creates a very beautiful situation where people have to choose to do that, right? They have to be they have to be wanting to be a part of that. And so I decided to run for office a couple of, was it in 23 actually. And a big part of my campaign was community schools, was this vision for community schools. And it really, although a lot of folks in the community may not know what they are, when you describe them, they're like, yeah, that's what we want. And so it was really a big part, vision of my campaign. A lot of volunteers, this is what inspired them, what motivated them. It was the idea of becoming a community school district, that would be the thing that I would be pushing for in our school district. And so now, how are things going? How are things working? I don't know if Rosa shared, but we're trying to transform things, right? We're trying to change things in this district that has been, school districts, especially in LA, have not historically taken care of the of the highest need, or the most vulnerable population, and have been run in the, especially in the last 15 years, more like businesses, right? So we're trying to go against that. We're trying to not have that happen. So it's been challenging because things are so hierarchical. And so to ensure that our schools have that shared leadership has been a challenge. And so one of the things that we've been working on is trying to empower the community schools to exercise their powers, their rights, their voice at the school sites. But we do that, we also want to look at them objectively and see the things that where we can grow. And one of the things, the areas that I think that almost everybody who's working in community schools would agree, is that we want to focus more on curriculum and instruction inside the community schools, right? That's got to look different than everywhere else. And so that is the work that we're trying to do right now. And even to do that work, we've had to fight for more autonomies, for the school sites to have autonomy around their professional development, because that is key to be able to do the curriculum that the community wants at at that particular school. And so that has been a fight. And then yesterday, we passed a resolution to give our community schools autonomy, because it it was happening before, and all of a sudden it was taken away. The district was dictating what professional development all schools, including community schools, had to do for 20 or 22 of their PDs for the whole year. And that was just, not acceptable for community schools. They weren't able to do the work that they wanted to do to meet the vision, to meet the needs of the community. So that was a resolution, and it passed unanimously, and they required a lot of organizing on a lot of different, different groups, but it passed. So the other thing that I think we need to work on is making it more cohesive, because in LAUSD, we have a lot of initiatives, a lot of programs, and they're all working in silo. And I think schools are struggling with seeing that we are a community school that does these different things, right? So if we see ourselves as a community school, then we are constantly looking at everything that we do through that lens. And I think that's not quite happening yet. So that's some of the work that needs to happen. And our office is going to be working on that. We have one of our staff persons, that's their focus, is community schools and BSAP schools, our Black Student Achievement Plan schools. So we're working on that. And then, like I said earlier, when we first passed the very first resolution in 2017, since then, we've had to pass different resolutions. We had to go on strike twice to win more things for community schools. And I think that we're going to have to continue doing that, right? Because it's still not fully ingrained in the system yet, and we don't want it to be, to be folded into the regular system, but it's still a fight and something that we need to work on.
Oh my God, thank you. There was so much information you just packed in there. I just want to give people a sense who are not in LA, that the district has approximately 1,000 schools. Is that about right? So when we're talking about 70 schools, that is a huge, amazing achievement, because each one is being built kind of from the ground up, working out that collaborative decision-making and that shared power. And that's just a whole new mindset for everyone involved, right? As well as the curriculum changes, as well as all of it, the wraparound services and everything that you want. Like every school should have this, but let's face it, they don't. But it's still just, it's like, it's 70 out of 1,000. And so that's where you have to be careful about getting lost in the district. And it's so exciting that people like you are actually now in there doing it, as opposed to always, I just think sometimes we get so stuck in the position of being on the outside, sticking our nose against the window. And it's like, no, 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 you open the door and you go in, right? And it's just great to hear. I just want to say one more thing, which you mentioned, which I'm not sure everyone who doesn't know about the initiative would understand, is that San Diego and LA are somewhat rare in that schools need to apply to be a community school. It's not that the district is like you, and you're going to be community schools. And then these schools are stuck whether they want to or not. It's a school has to be like, this is something we want and we're going to now apply. And that's a wonderful dynamic to set up without it being too onerous, of course. Okay. Moving on, Dr. Green, so great to have you here. We love CPI. CPI does so much wonderful work with community schools, but also in other ways. Can you describe CPI and what your mission is, and how did community schools fit into that vision?
Thank you so much for having me. I feel honored to be on this panel. So at CPI, what we are is we're dedicated to achieving economic and racial justice for San Diego County's workers and working families, working class families. And when we say we want economic and racial justice, we mean both in people's workplaces and in the broader community and all the institutions that shape working class people's lives day to day. And so that includes things like schools. We do our work. I always say that at CPI, we just do whatever we think needs to be done in the ecosystem of social movement organizations in our region. So we do research, we do popular education, we do leadership development, but most importantly, we do organizing. And sometimes that's coalition organizing, and sometimes that's grassroots organizing. Another feature about CPI, our mission, is to work with and sometimes be a bridge between unions and I make a point of this, and other community-based organizations, because I like to point out that labor unions are a type of community. And it's made up of members of our community. So we don't other our labor unions. That's an important part of our mission. So what that comes down to is that schools really fit into our notion. One, we recently did strategic planning and we had a goal. We thought, if you were really trying to see power for working class families, what are some of the things you'd have to have? And we believe one of those things is what we call liberatory education. People should go to schools where they learn to have power and voice, and to be able to change the world around them. And so community schools fit very firmly into that for a few reasons. One, because it brings all kinds of stakeholders together. It says every parent, every member of the community, every teacher, every person in the education system deserves to have a voice, and students need to play a role in shaping those institutions. So one, we think if a school system that really embodies that is going to be liberatory. But another thing is, because I want to focus in on the part about workers, like it's really important for us that community schools center the people who work in schools as well. All too often, we see systems disempower the people who work inside of them. And we think that, especially in schools, this is dangerous. Most of us, even though the neoliberals tell us all we are going to all become entrepreneurs and run our own systems, most of us are going to grow up and we're going to work. And when young people see workers being disrespected, it's like, what is that to work towards? Like, how can you feel excited about growing up and entering the world when the jobs that we do are not valued? And I think most students experience a situation where they see a disconnect between what their teacher and other educators want to do and think is important. And then they can start, especially as you get older, you start to see the ways that gets shut down. And so we thought that community schools were critically important in that way of offering an alternative vision, an alternative way to do things. And that they would ultimately result in access to high quality public education for all young people in San Diego. Our vision is that if community schools, while it is true, Philippa, that schools have to apply, our hope is that it will be so exciting and so successful that every school will want to be a community school because they'll see that that offers something, that they haven't seen before. So I think this has really allowed us to like tap into that set of goals that we had. And so I'll stop there for now.
That's amazing. I actually hadn't really thought about that idea of how students see teachers and the staff and everyone and what's the message there. So actually, I'm gonna just offer this question to all of you, but I mean, partly this is about CPI. Specifically, can you talk about how community organizations like CPI and in LA, Unite LA, can strengthen the community school model? Why is it important to have a nonprofit involved? What is that role and how does that help?
Yeah. I think one thing that's important about it is that at the root, the Center on Policy Initiatives has always been a coalition building organization. And if you think about like the concept of community schools, at the heart of it, it's a coalition of interests coming together. So I think it's been really important to have an organization that gets that, knows how to get people together, address different types of interests, and help navigate discussions that get people to consensus, right? And the other thing, and this is somewhat unfortunate, I'll say, is that people trust us. People in the community trust us in ways that they have sometimes lost trust in the major institutions, including the school district, because they see people start initiatives and promise big things and not follow through. And in the 30-year history of CPI, I think we've consistently delivered. We consistently show up and we do what we say we're going to do, and we follow. We're not like typical policy organizations. We don't just say, here's a policy. We listen to community. We develop ideas together. We then do the work to pass those policies, and then we stay there to do the implementation work. And so folks knew that like if we said we were going to get involved, we were going to do our best to see it all the way through to success. And so I think community organizations can offer that, especially in spaces where people maybe have seen a lot of efforts by other institutions and not seen them come to fruition. I think the other thing that we bring is that because we live in this whole community, in this ecosystem of organizations, we're good at matching when schools identify their needs. We often know other community partners that could help meet those needs. And we are also always the organization sort of bringing the question, like, who's missing at this table? Because we know that what we would hate to see is a community school that's been built up and then you get to the, what you think is the end and you realize like, oh, wait, we didn't include immigrant families here, or we didn't speak to foster youth. So I think that's something we try to bring to all of our work and that we bring to this space. And the final thing I'll say about it is I think often people think that organizations like ours are only there to like criticize institutions. But I think, in fact, when you watch what we do, we actually, in every space we work in, at the end results of it is a stronger institution, whether it's workplaces, businesses or schools. When we're done, it's a space that people believe in and they're invested in, and they want to make sure those institutions have the resources they need to thrive.
Thank you. I also want to say that my understanding was that CPI also acted sometimes as a trusted intermediary between groups that were, have painful histories sometimes, teachers and districts, there's a lot going on back there, over the years. And sometimes it can be so helpful to bridge those gaps and have some trusted middle manager a little bit to say, okay, we're going to work through this together. I'm sure Rosa and Carla, you probably have thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I would just add going off of that point. I know like when I started coming into this work and trying to navigate and understand the landscape in LA, I mean, I was like, it was a little sad to hear that our teachers union had such a bad relationship with community organizations, right? Like that there was some really not great history between parents and student organizations and the teachers union. And so I think that there is like the specific entity of Unite LA who's kind of being the intermediary like in this particular project around community schools that provides, I think, the facilitation and the technical assistance I think that Dr. Green is speaking to. Um, and the union itself had to do a lot of work with community organizations, with community folk, and to just really sit down and rebuild that trust, right? That why would our teachers union want to share power with parents and students? Like that's a question, right? That you know, is rooted in a distrust of educators, right? Who sometimes were not of the communities, right? That we were serving. So I think that Unite LA as playing that role in this particular initiative is like one part, right, of like the role that other folks like Reclaim Our Schools LA, for example, is not exactly playing that technical assistant role, I think, but they are sort of a space where you have students, parents, and teachers kind of coming together and doing that transformative organizing work that Dr. Green spoke to, right? So it's kind of interesting that it's kind of happening in different spaces, but Unite LA has definitely, because it was written into the MOU, right? That Unite LA was going to be this body, and in many ways, because it was a neutral, right, space, like like group that both sides were like, okay, we trust that we can do this very hard work that we know is going to require sitting down and letting go some of that, not letting go, but like, you know, honoring that history, right? And then deepening the relationship between the district and the union. If we're going to say that you have to do this at schools, then we as an initiative need to model what it means to be collaborative. And so that was a lot of hard work. And yeah, United LA definitely supported us in that.
Amazing. Can you maybe say a little bit about bargaining for the common good?
Yeah, so that is and Carla spoke to it earlier. I don't know if you want to speak to it, Carla. But um yeah, I think when we, like I said, when we kind of set on the path as a union to think about like what is it going to take to really win, right? To really win some of these big demands, and not just our own salary, right? Not just our working conditions, but really get to an understanding that in order to get the schools, right, that our kids deserve, and to really transform and build different kinds of schools, we also need to be in communication and conversation with community and talk about what are the needs that community have, and what do they want to see in schools. And so we entered into these conversations through Reclaim Our School, with parents, with students, where they told us, you know what, students, what they wanted was to get rid of random searches, right? Like they did not want police on police treating them the way they were on campus. And that was a real big thing, right? For teachers to sit and listen to students and hear them say that they feel uncomfortable and they feel profiled by police on campus. Man, it was, they were hard conversations, but through that process, you know, we were transformed as a union, I think. And then students being able to hear what the teachers' issues were, right? It was really, really powerful. And then to bring forward a platform that was like, this is what we all want together. I think it's what really made the 2019 strike really as powerful as it was.
Absolutely. One of partners is Anchor Networks is the Dignity in Schools campaign. So when you talk about kids, cops in school,
Yep.
all of that, that's just so important and so dear to my heart. Carla, you mentioned earlier sharing power. And I had mentioned earlier about collaborative decision making and why it's so important. Can you tell us a little bit more? Can we dig into this? And I love me a committee, a well-designed committee. It makes my heart sing. And I know LA has some really great ones. Can you talk a little bit about how does it actually look? How do you codify sharing power? And
Yeah.
how has it worked in LA?
Yeah, so I remember I shared about how we actually put community schools and the way that community schools were going to be run, or the way that they were going to be um, created at a school site through our contract, right? And so we thought, okay, where is the power going to be held? Who holds the power of a community school? Who makes decisions? And we happen to have a committee in our contract called Local School Leadership Committee, which is council, I'm sorry, which has teachers, or UTLA members, I should say, one administrator. It has parents, community members, and a classified staff member. And the uniqueness of the local school leadership is that there are equal number of um, of UTLA members as the rest of them. So 4 UTLA members, 4 of admin, classified parent, student, right? And so we felt like that was a space that could be the decision-making place, right? So the local school leadership would make decisions about the community school. But prior to but having that as the decision-making body, but also there seemed to be a need for another team that would lead the work of implementing the community school plan at a school site. And so then there's the implementation team, right? That happens when a community school is birthed, let's say. And that one is also supposed to be representative of parents, of students, of admin, of educators, classified. And there's through trainings you learn that you want to include as many people as possible, and especially those that you generally don't think of including, right? Like maybe the custodial staff or a cafeteria worker, because you only see them in passing, right? You don't see them in a classroom, but we want to make sure that we include them as well, or a bus driver if you can, so those are the spaces where the decision making happens. And another thing that was one in our contract around what are the powers of this local school leadership. So among the powers was having access to all the budgets of the school. So excuse me, prior to that, without a community school, principals only have to show small budgets like materials budget or copy machine budget, and that's it. And then any categorical like Title I or Title III would be under school site council. And then everything else was just nobody had to see it, right? It was held in the principal's office. And so now with community school, it was like, no, now all the budgets are under the purview of the local school leadership council. And they review all the plans and they approve the plans. The other one was professional development, which I alluded to earlier, is the language in the contract said that local school leadership at a community school had purview over all professional development. And our contract language for all other schools is that the district has 20 purview over 20 professional development, and UTLA, the teachers union, has purview over 20. So we have a total of 40, right? Well, at a community school, it was all local school leadership. But of course, the district said, oh, no, that's not how we're interpreting the contract. No, it's the same as all the other schools, right? So that became a big battle for almost a whole year. Well, I would say this whole year, our community schools have had no autonomy over their professional development until yesterday, when we passed this resolution that brought it back to the local school leadership council. And now next year, we're going to be able to have the local school leadership have purview over professional development. And so that's just a very detailed look at where the power is held. But, the idea is that that's how we want to run even our district, right? This is a little space, a microcosm of what we're trying to build big, right? How we want our society to be, how we want our schools to be, our district to be, that when they have budget discussions, that they're participatory budget conversations, right? Where the community has a say-so as to how we should be spending the money. And so community schools represents that. The other, which, you know, a lot of people don't see that when they think of community schools. They still describe them as a place where services are given, right? That we're trying, which is hugely important. And what we found is that a lot of community schools, when they first start, that's where they put all their energies, building the partnerships to bring more resources to our schools. And sometimes, you know, we may forget the power of this local school leadership, where the shared leadership happens. And so there, you know, it becomes more democratic in that space. There's also, you know, the steering committee that oversees the work of the community schools. And in that steering committee, there is a collaboration between the district and the union, and a co-convener, which is the Unite LA, which is Rosa was part of the steering committee. I think you co-chaired the steering committee. So we also want to empower that, right? And to have more of a say-so. So just to give you another example, if about the steering committee. So part of this language for our professional development is we're making a subcommittee of the steering committee to support the schools that are working on professional development. And because they're aligned with the vision and of community schools. And if there's any vacancies, we want the steering committee to be part of the hiring process, right? We want to empower. So again, that's another way of sharing power. And our focus for the next, you know, at least in our office, our focus is to strengthen these spaces, strengthen the local school leadership, strengthen the power of the steering committee, and also insert these ideas in the general district work. So, for example, this year we're in budget discussions. Our office is going to hold various, you know, budget conversations with different groups, with students, with educators in special education, and in different regions of my district. And what we want is, we want to hear what folks want, you know, the district to invest its funds in, and then use that information for me to advocate for that when I'm in the boardroom. So, you know, that's another way that we are trying to create more shared leadership. And then, you know, we want to create classrooms, and, you know, you want to also go back to the classroom and ensure that your educators are also having the same vision of doing that in their own classroom, so that students have a voice in the classroom, right? And value the voice that students bring to the classroom. And to that, you know, to that end, like project-based learning is one of the things that a lot of our students have been asking for, because it's more hands-on, it's relative, it's relevant, and it's meaningful. And so it's getting our own educators to also see that as part of being a community school educator, is having a shared power to some extent in the classroom.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And I want to just also just pull out a thread where I think I've heard many times people say a food pantry is good, but it's not a community school. Like, you can have a service at the school, but part of the community school vision is not just the services of different kinds and the supports of different kind. It's the how, and it's that collaborative decision making. I want to throw this to Dr. Green 1 second, but I just want to remind our audience that we will have a Q&A at the end. So please put your question in on the Q&A button down below if you have any questions, and we will be getting to them soon. But Dr. Green, can you also talk a little bit about what does collaborative decision making look like in San Diego? I know it's not exactly the same in every community, and it's actually a little bit different in San Diego. Can you talk a little bit about how that's going? And also, what are the challenges? Because it's hard.
Yeah. Well, first, I want to say that Carla is making my heart all warm because I am dreaming of the day when we are talking about budgets in that way. And that's because at the Center on Policy Initiatives, we actually house two budget coalitions that work on the City of San Diego budget and the county budget. And so we absolutely believe in that like deciding how money is spent is one of the most critical aspects of governing something. The how, part of that how is who gets to spend the money and who gets to make decisions. So the structure is pretty similar in San Diego. We are earlier in this process, so it was really important for us to make sure that we had an implementation team at the district level that would help make sure that the model was being applied with fidelity, and could offer technical assistance and guidance to community schools as they were developing and ensure that people, could come back and ask questions about elements. At the same time, at the school site level, we decided it was really important in this work that we did that there was already a structure that was supposed to exist at every school called a site governance team. And it was really intentional on our part not to recreate the wheel, to try to strengthen that existing structure, because we thought that if we try to, it was going to be another example, like we're going to come with another new flashy name and a new flashy way of doing it, and it was just going to turn people off. So instead, we thought it was really important to say, this is something that the district and that the teachers union and that community members said was important, and we should spend our time and energy actually making this a strong structure that can govern schools. And to talk about it's uneven is the truth. Because some site governance teams were already stronger, already had lots of representation, and some site governance teams were really just the teachers union and the principal and right, and no parents were in the room. We have a school where there's one of our community schools where they talk about moving from having 3 families showing up at their site governance team to having 51 families engaged in governance, in just a 2-year period. So this is for us, this is huge to do that. And right now, the first amount, each school, the district was able to get a grant and was able to have $100,000 that schools could spend on additional programs, resources, whatever the site governance team, the structure at their school decided on. And so it was an example of, while it was true that a lot of that was about services or new classes or, programs, but what was really important is that no 2 schools have the same program. It wasn't like somebody at the district gets to decide or they have 5 options. Every single school could say, this is what we really need. This is what's going to be important. And so that decision is made at that level. And I just want to make just a small plug for why I think it is true that a food pantry or a clothes closet is not a community school, but why it is critical to that. People cannot exercise power at its highest levels when they're hungry or when they're feeling self-conscious about what they're wearing, or they don't feel clean because they don't have access to a shower. So some of that is about addressing the needs that make it possible for people to then feel welcome and invited. So it's not just hey, this is an extra thing. It's actually, this is what's going to improve people's lives and make it possible to govern together. And so, there are still some schools where you can tell, even though the school applied to be a community school, that site administration is really struggling with now the reality that the people that they brought together to do this proposal took that seriously and intend to be part of making decisions. And we love to see it. Honestly, we love to see that struggle because that's how we get to something better.
Oh, I love that. What do you say to a principal who wanted that delicious state money and it's now a community school? I know that's a conversation that sometimes happens. Do any of you want to talk about that? I mean, it's about a mindset and how do we say no? These are people with on the ground knowledge that will actually make your decisions better. It might take some more time at the top, right?
Yeah, I'll just say one thing. I mean, it's wild to me that they don't see how much easier their job will be if they share power. I'm just how is that not like a logical thing? But I do think that what you said around there's a ground up, right? Like there's a bottom up stuff that's happening, but also we need the help of, for example, the administrators union, right? To be like, hey, principals, like let's shift and think about different in the same way that our union, right, as teachers, we had to shift the mindset. Principals, administrators, and other folks need to do that. And the district needs to do a better job of training administrators, right? To be like, look, and this is not just for community schools, it's for all schools. Like your job is to, be in communication, collaboration with everybody at your site, right? How do you do that? And this is going to make your job easier, trust me, right? But like you said, they're hard conversations. And then there's great administrators, right? And they're just like, yes, let's do this. They're so excited. But it's not, yeah, it's not easy.
And if I could just speak to that part about like why it's easier to govern, which we try to tell city council members, look, every single part of it, when you open up the books and you say like, here's what we have to spend, here are the choices that we have to make. When people can see that sometimes the answer is no, not because people don't share your values, but because there truly are not the resources to do that right now. Like that's one way we think, we see that over and over again. The people who've been in our Community Budget Alliance for years, like they understand when we say there's trouble with revenue this year, and they understand what that means. And what they want to have a say on is like, okay, even if there have to be cuts, we get to decide what we're willing to give up and what's too critical to, to do that too. And so I think that becomes a better situation. It is easy. Honestly, I think everyone who has a leadership role should understand it is really easy for people to stand outside a situation when you hide all the information, for them to just go like, well, it's your fault then. You did it. You made the choices, you made bad choices, you made my life bad. But when you share power, people can actually understand why there are tough choices to be made. And then we hope, look, I'm not going to try to hide the ball. We hope that those parents, we think that people will consistently run into resource challenges. We hope that that will also help spur conversations around increasing revenue and taxing the right people so that we can fund our schools the way they need to be funded.
Yes. So I noticed we have a question from Laura Compton. She wrote, we have a parent participation school right now, and there's been some challenges between shared decision-making at our campus. How do you manage when it feels like too many cooks in the kitchen? And yes, before you answer that question, whoever wants to answer, I will say that we are recording this, and we will send a link to the recording out to everyone who signed up for this webinar. So that's true. But to Laura's question, who would like to take that one?
Carla, do you want to?
I'll do it in 1 sec.
I could jump in for just a second while Carla's getting ready. I mean, I will just say that I think this is another role that good technical assistance can help with. Because one thing that we're really comfortable doing is taking a large group of people and moving them to consensus. And it's not too many, it doesn't feel like too many cooks. It feels like lots of good ideas and then like moving together to get to an answer. And so I think that's one thing I'll just offer, that some of it is getting some assistance with people who are used to bringing unruly groups, which I love to be a part of, to consensus.
Yeah, I was just going to say that there are some skilled humans out there that are really good at this stuff. It may not be us, it may not be me. And I do think that we need to use the funds that we do have for community schools and consider investing in those things, right? And people who can come and teach us how to better handle conflict. I mean, that is like literally the foundation of all of our problems. Like, so we cannot handle conflict. Like when we disagree with people, or we feel hurt, right? Or we feel like we haven't been seen. And that just like goes and goes and goes. I mean, we have seen this now that we've been in the school board office, and like how we see conflicts at schools. And I'm just like, whoa, people over there, it started as one little thing, and the people didn't have the skills. Like, how do I handle this? Like, how do I deal with this conflict that I'm having? And so bringing in people to help us figure that out, I think is key. And I'll see if Carla has anything to add to that, because man, whew.
No, I agree. I think that is very key to go outside, right, and get some help. I think we all feel like we have to fix it and say if you're the community school coordinator, you're the one in charge, you feel like you have to know everything and you have to fix that problem, and you don't. You know, vulnerability is a good thing, and to be able to reach out to everybody, and like Rosa said, how, you know, if you have extra funds to be able to get that support, that would be great. And then I was just gonna say that in terms of whenever there's a principal and, you know, and the coordinator, right? And how do you manage the sharing power when the principal thought it was going to be one way and then it turned out to be differently? So one of the things that the training program that we have here in LAUSD is that we start off, as a community school coordinator, the very first thing that they trained us in is having these one-on-one conversations with your principal, right? Like really start developing relationship with your principal and be empowered to be not like the union leader that you're necessarily equal, but you are at the same time like you're partners in this, right? And they really encouraged us to do that. And they also did some trainings with principals about what the expectations were. Not enough, I will say, but like they need to expand on it. I think they touched on how to address some of the power dynamics that, you know, that they're seeing that are happening. But I think that we're lucky here in LAUSD that we have an office for community schools, and we have coaches, and we have and then, you know, different admin of instruction. And so I think that if people get trained in how to do this shared leadership too, I think that can really alleviate a lot of those issues that come up.
Thank you. Now we are officially over, and of course now we're getting a couple of fantastic questions. Is everyone okay if we stay on for 5 more minutes? Are we okay with that? 5? Okay. So very quickly, Petula, from DBE, the Democracy Beyond Elections, and PBP, which is particularly budgeting project, has said that there are some ED reformers who think that community school model focuses on human services and provide mediocre academic curriculum at best. In other words, they claim that the model perpetuates the cycle of poverty and are the opinion that a quality education is the key out of poverty. What are your thoughts?
Okay, I really want to take this one because this is one of my this is one of my favorite things to talk about. At CPI, we say all the time, with all due respect to education, we are not going to educate our way out of poverty because poverty is systemic. And if we are going to use education to get our way out of poverty, we're going to do that by helping people understand how to create new systems that operate differently than the ones we are in today. But just training, and I use this mental exercise with people. I developed it when I was a sociology professor. I said, like, imagine that we could like wave a wand and every single person would have like a PhD. They have the highest level of training in any field. Well, you're still going to need people to clean the bathrooms, and you're still going to need people to like provide childcare to small children, and you're going to need all of those same things. And either we decide that we're going to pay people fairly or we don't. But it's not about just educating our way there. So I just want to start with that principle, just that like the whole idea that like we just educate our way out of poverty, and that's the problem, that people who are poor just haven't gotten a quality education when there's systemic racism and sexism and homophobia that are also challenges. And I think that a liberatory education and curriculum actually helps people to see that system and have the power to think about how they would change that system.
Okay, our last question. We've got 3 minutes. Rosa, we're at one of the exact moments you described about your fight for community schools. In Columbus, Ohio, my school is finishing its first year as a community school after our union won contract language for a pilot through a strike in 2022. The school board won't support us. They've refused to hire a coordinator. Ugh. But we're building power on the ground level of our school and trying to convince the district of the model. What strategies and tactics were most effective for winning over those with institutional power?
such a great question. And yeah, I mean, I think we won the contract one time, then we had to go on strike again, right? To win more. So this is not going to happen one and done. But we also know that it takes a lot of energy to build towards a strike, right? So you don't want, there's no way you can do it every single year. In between that time though, right, we were pushing at the school board, right? We were drafting resolutions, right? We created that coalition on the ground of parents, students, teachers, right? That really built the power to put pressure on our school board members, right? And call them in to have this conversation with us around what do we want our schools to look like and why these investments need to be real. So it is multiple, but I would say ultimately, and we always come back to this, like even with like we won this resolution yesterday and we're going to do these things, but in the back of our minds we're like, okay, when is the next contract coming up, right? Because that is really when they are going to give up lots of things. And I would say that the next time that that happens is that you are even more powerful and you would have asked for more things, right? That and not just a pilot, right? It's not just, you know, a promise to do this or that, but like really putting in some of those investments and some of that infrastructure into the contract.
Thank you so much. We are over time. Otherwise, I could ask you so many more questions. This has been extraordinary. I can't thank you all enough for answering these questions, sharing your wisdom. It's just been such a joy. And I want to thank everyone who helped us to get here. I've learned so much. I want to thank our audience for joining us and to thank the NEA for co-hosting and to Ben Palmquist, who has been providing much needed support throughout. Thank you so much and good night.